these could have been a little bit more satisfying. They're an acrylic bamboo blend from Loops and Threads, perfect pair sock yarn, colorway Pink Cadillac. And unfortunately, they didn't keep the shape of the sock blockers. Good day, folks. How's your sheltering in place going? These went by pretty quickly. I'm going to keep working on my family sock project in the background so we can move along to other items. See, I thought I was knitting these for one of the people on my list, but now that I see the colors, I'm pretty sure they're meant for someone else entirely. So while we're one pair ahead, we're also kinda one pair behind. Sorta. I purchased 8 balls of Paton's classic worsted wool a few years back with the intention of knitting the iconic Central Park hoodie. Unfortunately, as can often happen when purchasing sweater yarn from Michaels, the dye lots are inconsistent. I'm also not certain I have enough yardage to create the size I need. Eventually I will knit the Central Park hoodie. It would be an awesome addition to the wardrobe for spring, late summer, or the warmer parts of autumn. It's only a matter of time and having the money to buy the materials, and when that happens I'll likely invest in some wool of the Andes from Knit Picks. I made a Doctor Who scarf from the DK weight a few years back for my nephew, and it turned out awesome. I'm going to be casting on the largest size of Crumb by Andi Satterlund. I'm very happy she's included larger sizes with her patterns. Ravelry really has made a push to encourage designers to be more size inclusive, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who appreciates the effort. This is going to be an adventure for both you and me. I've only knit one adult sweater before, a cobblestone pullover designed by Jared Flood made for the Husbeast out of Cascade 220. I've attempted a sweater for myself, but it was out of acrylic and honestly, my heart just wasn't in it. Maybe I'll salvage and repurpose that yarn for something else, but at this point I'm not even sure where it got stashed. The style of vintage we're looking at is 1950s. By this time, fashion in Britain and North America had recovered from the austerity of the 40s. No longer did you need to ration your yarn supplies and dip into your sweater stash to send mittens, socks, and helmet liners to the boys on the front. Fabric was more accessible, so hemlines dropped and full circle skirts became the fashion. Sweaters that dropped to the hips but clung to the waist came into style. Andi Satterlund's cropped sweaters fit nicely into that in-between time when sweaters were still sitting around or slightly north of the waist. They look like they'd be flattering for not only 1950s dresses with the nipped-in waistline, but also dresses and long shirts with empire waistlines, a style that I find flattering and tend to gravitate toward. The first step to any journey is preparation, so today we're going to be casting on a couple of swatches. I know my gauge for knitting socks, but this is a sweater and the yarn thickness is a lot different. I want to know in advance if the fabric I'm creating is possibly going to turn out larger or smaller than anticipated. I'd also like to get an idea of the feel of the fabric and whether or not it will be suitable for the sweater I'm knitting. You can tell a lot from a swatch. Okay, so this is my first swatch. You'll notice I made it a lot bigger than it needed to be. The gauge on the pattern calls for 18 stitches and 26 rows to make a 4-inch square. So I made this something like 30 stitches by 34 rows, not including the seed stitch border, so I'd be able to get a feel for the fabric. And the fabric is great. Don't get me wrong, I would gladly put on a sweater at this gauge on a cool summer evening. Unfortunately, we're off by about 2 or 3 stitches. I'm getting 13 stitches by 24 rows. So we have to go down in needle size. Of course, this is unwashed, so I'll be tossing it in some soak and leaving it out to dry overnight to see whether or not it shrinks or relaxes and blocks large. Alrighty, so here we have swatch number 2, knit on size 7 or 4.5 millimeter needles, so one size down from the size 8s. It's a nice fabric, it's not too stiff and not too loose. It could stand to actually be a wee bit looser. There's a little bit of a difference in the weave, but I don't think the camera can pick it up. I'll maybe take a better picture later and stick it in Photoshop, try to line it up. So on the smaller swatch, I'm getting a gauge of 20 stitches and 26.5 rows per 4 inches. So I have a feeling that this is going to be the gauge I go with, because if it relaxes just a wee bit in the wash, it should be almost perfect. So let's toss these bad boys into the drink and see what they have for us. Coincidentally, Roxanne Richardson has put together an excellent video on knitting gauge swatches. It popped up in my YouTube subscriptions list while I was knitting the first swatch. So I'll leave a link to it here and you can see her method. I gave the swatches a dunk in the sink with some eucalan. I squeezed out the water, rolled them up in a towel, and then stumped on the towel roll for a bit to get rid of any sogginess. Then I let them air dry overnight. The final gauge after washing? Well, the swatch knit on size 8 needles is sitting at 18 stitches by 24.5 rows. The size 7 swatch has 20 stitches by 26 rows. So I either counted wrong the first time I measured the larger swatch pre-washing, or the wash helped corral some of those stitches into place because it shrank to fit 5 extra stitches into the 4-inch span. While it's certainly possible I counted wrong, I'm one of those folks who knows she has trouble with numbers, so I usually count more than once, often up to 3 or 4 times to be sure. So I think we can chalk this up to the wash. And this is precisely why we wash and block after knitting a swatch, to get an idea what the final fabric will be like. I referred back to Roxanne's video on gauge swatches, and she's of the opinion that because row gauge is so much harder to match, it's not as significant as stitch gauge, and I'm going to agree with her on that. We'll go with the swatch knit on size 8 needles because if I can get bang on 18 stitches per 4 inches, that's pretty awesome. There are so many variables that can cause row gauge to go wonky. The knitter's tendency to knit tight or loose, for example, or the actual gauge of the needles used, the properties of the way the yarn was spun or the amount of wool content. Heck, as a spinner, I'm aware that even the breed of the sheep and the crimp of its wool can cause changes in the way that it will shrink or bloom. So I'm not going to sweat it. Sometimes you can fudge these things in blocking. Sometimes. I'm going to get started casting on. We'll see where we're sitting next week. It's starting to warm up here in Calgary, and with temperatures starting to hit 20 degrees Celsius, we might be casting on a lightweight lace shawl project sooner rather than later. I actually kind of enjoyed doing the prep work for casting on this project. I know a lot of people don't like to swatch before starting, but as I'm what you'd call a non-standard size, I'd like to minimize as many fitting issues as I can right from the get-go. If you're a sweater knitter, what's your opinion? Are you a swatch all the time kind of knitter, or do you prefer to fly by the seat of your pants? Or have you knit so many sweaters you don't need to swatch anymore? I'd love it if you left me a comment with your opinions. For now, the cat and I are going to get a jump on this cardigan and, well, I'm going to work on the cardigan. She's just going to give me reproachful looks when I don't automatically give her the amount of treats she wants. Don't let the cute looks fool you. She's a devious mastermind of manipulation and deception.